Hello and welcome to the second of these video workshops exploring ornamentation on harps. My name's Karen Marshalsay and I'm a traditional musician from Scotland, and this is the second of the series. There's going to be 7 in total. The first one went out last Friday, and if you've not seen it yet, it would be good to go back and watch that. There was a lot of contextual and background information about ornamenting traditional tunes and traditional style. And we also looked at several particular things. We looked at cuts, cutting up and cutting down, where you're leaving that grace note ringing. And then we also looked at what happens if you want to stop that grace note off, because remember, other traditional instruments, you don't hear those grace notes anymore once the player has moved on to play the tune note. Those grace notes are cut off, and we can do that on the harp too. So we have the best of both worlds. We can leave those notes ringing and get a lovely shimmering effect with lots of harmony, or we can cut them off and get a really clean style of playing that really suits pipe tunes, for example. So we looked at the thumb choke, the forked choke, the short plait and the half scratch in episode 1. And if you find these names intriguing and they're very new to you, it really would be good to go back and have a look at that episode. This week, we're going to look at 2 particular movements that are really, really useful, and I use them a lot in my playing. The first one is called the beat, and the second one is the little finger plait, which is hopefully also intriguing because these little fingers don't get used very often in harp playing, so this is totally legit way of using them and bringing them into your playing. So the beat, it's ornamenting a single note, and it's really useful. There's a movement in piping called a birrell. The piper is fingering a lowie. You can imagine my chanter here. I should have brought it through, but I didn't. All your fingers on, and it's a lowie. There is one hole down here, and the piper is going to just flick his little pinky out over and back over it. So you're temporarily sounding the low G, and you're getting this rhythmic burble. And this is one of the things we spoke about last week. Pipers, it's a rhythmic effect quite often with their grace notes that they're getting, and that's something that we need to try and emulate on the harp, is the rhythm of the grace notes. And a beat is great for doing a birrell, so let's have a look at it. We're going to demonstrate on these 2 notes here, the A to the B. So place your 3rd finger on the A and your 2nd finger on the B. You're in this slightly floaty hand position that you might find awkward if you're not used to this style of playing. If you've always played with your thumb placed, you might find this a little bit awkward, but it really is worth trying out. So I want you to place your 3rd finger on the A and your 2nd finger on the B, and keep that thumb out the way at the minute. I'll talk you through the steps. Your 3rd finger plays the A, your 4th finger comes out and places on it to damp that string. Your 2nd finger plays the B, and your thumb comes on it to damp that string. Your 4th finger is now going to play the A and leave it ringing. So to go through it slowly, lower string with your 3rd, 4 lands on it. Upper string with your 2nd, thumb lands on it, play the lower string with your 4th. Play 3, place 4. Play 2, place 1, play 4. Now, we need to get rid of one of those movements, because what happens is we're going to squish the playing and the placing together, and you're going to play, and from now on you're going to place a finger and play the other finger at exactly the same time. So you're cutting off one sound and sounding the other string at the same time. So you're playing, and then we're going to do this. So we're going to play the 2nd finger and damp with the 4th at exactly the same time. Now we're going to do the same thing. We're going to damp with our thumb and play with our 4th at the same time. Now 3, And you really need to learn these movements slowly, steadily, really keep in control at all times. Sometimes the fingers have a bit of a mind of their own when you're learning something new or a fingering style that you're not used to. And if you practice that slowly and build it up with control so that every note is even, you can then play that at any speed or with any sort of level of dynamic. You're in control. You have the control to express that movement as you want it to appear in a particular tune at a particular point. So, and when you start speeding it up, it starts sounding a lot more interesting. Oh, I could hear that in a tune, you might think. Now, I'm just going to say briefly as well, I do have fingernails and I do play a lot with my fingernails on gut harps as well as wire harps and braid harps. Not so much on the pedal. It's very difficult for me to demonstrate these gestures without bringing my nails into contact because they're not the sort of gestures, it's not the sort of fingering where you've got your thumb up and your fingers down. You might be playing like that in a tune and that's perfectly fine. But for these quick, light, fast but delicate grace notes, even if you're just playing with your pads, you want it to be the ends of your fingers, the ends of your finger pads. So you're more at right angles to the string than pointing down the way. And of course, when I do that, I have nails, so my nails are going to catch. I love the sound of the nails on the harp. I'm struggling a bit tonight. Broken this one just before I started filming. And this one I'm trying to grow back in and it's a little bit slanty, and this one's is the length I normally like to have when I'm playing, but of course it's now out of kilter with the other two. So yeah, that is a bit of a problem when you do play with nails, that you're always footering with your nail and filing it down gently, or you're always carrying, I always go to gigs with false nails and super glue and all sorts of things like that. But that's another story. The point is, these aren't just nail techniques. You don't have to have nails. They will sound slightly different. They will sound slightly softer. You're always going to get a cleaner, slightly brighter sound with your fingernails, but you do not need to have fingernails to do these. So please do try them out and don't just dismiss it as, oh, that's fingernail stuff on a wire harp, because it's not. It can really add something to your playing of whatever type of music on whatever harp. So if we go back to the beat, we're going to practice it on a scale going downwards. Starting on the C and using the upper note. So it's two notes before a main note or a tune note. In this case it's a scale note. I'm counting that as a tune note. So that last note has got to be the one that stands out. You can take it slower. You can take it a bit faster. Starts making more sense perhaps when I'm talking about it being a rhythmic effect. You're not really hearing. That's a different thing. We're just going for this burble before the main note. It is best to practice it descending. If you do it up the way, then you're going to be leaving that last note ringing and it is literally going to muddy the sound. So let's not do that. Once you're comfortable with it and it's in your fingers, you can move away from it always being in scales and just try out intervals. where your ear takes you. Don't overthink it at all. Just think about creating the beat and what note you're going to be decorating with a beat. Pay attention while you are practicing like this though, because certain little phrases or certain intervals will catch your ear and you think, oh, I like that, so do them again, do it several times. Maybe try the same interval but from a different starting point. Gradually you'll start collecting little nuggets that you like the sound of, and you can string them together and you've got your own exercise. If you quite like doing that, then you can create a second part and it might become a tune. So I would really highly recommend this way of practicing. For this technical work in particular, create your own exercises, start creating your own tunes, why not? So that's the beat. We are at the minute just playing it on 2 adjacent strings. If you get that going under your fingers, you can do it over a third. Exactly the same thing, you're now just, your fingers are slightly further apart. Leave that one until you've got it going. I mostly use it on adjacent strings, but sometimes you do just want to do it over a third or more. I sometimes do it over a fourth, but that's not that common. So there's a tune we looked at last week, Thig and Bàta. It's a lovely, simple but beautiful Gaelic song. I'll play it through straight. And last week we used that to put in some of our cuts and thumb chokes and short plaits and things. This week we're going to put some beats in. Now I'm going to highlight a few places that would be good to put them in, but absolutely experiment with where you feel you might like to try them out and then listen to see if that's a good effect or not. There's these 2 C's here. I'm going to play it on the first one. But when I repeat this phrase, I'm now going to play it on the second one. And that's quite a good thing to do, to practice not always having your grace notes in exactly the same place. It does, this type of fluidity in your ornamentation does raise the issue of, oh, but that means my fingering's changing the second time round the tune, and this is something we will look at a little bit later on in the series as one of the things that you do have to come up against and find solutions for. But the bottom line is, yes, I'm afraid it does mean your fingering changes. You don't have that nice set fingering that you use exactly the same way every single time you play the tune. But you just have to look at that as an opportunity, really, and it lets you develop a fluidity that can really drop these grace notes and this ornamentation in at different points at different times, depending on how you feel, depending on if you're playing it on your own, if you're playing with other players, or where you're playing, what the sound's like, all sorts of things. And that's something that I find really exciting, to be honest. To make it different every single time is really, really good and very traditional. That would be a traditional style of playing. So if I was just starting the tune, I wouldn't put it on the very first note, but this is a tune you're going to play several times, so it'd be nice to put one on, to put a beat onto that first C on one of the repeats. So let's practice that on the first C. And now we're going to put it on the second C. So there's a few more places that you can practice them. I've kept it out of this phrase, but I've added it in. Sometimes you might play that, for example. Other times, and a lot of this with Gaelic song in particular, it's depending on the rhythm of the words. The words would always take precedence, so you want to follow the rhythm of the words. So you might find yourself doing and thinking of that as two C's. So this time I did with a beat and a beat on the low G. So that's one example. That's something that you could use as a little study. I do produce a PDF, an accompanying PDF with the sheet music of everything that I'm talking about each week. And this week I'll have the explanations, as I did last week, and some of the little exercises. And when we take a tune as an example like this, Thig and Bàta, I'll write down what I've played on the video. It's great if you want to learn by ear, but it can also be really good to actually see it notated and to make you think a little bit more about how to notate it perhaps, or help you remember, or some people just don't really like learning by ear and they'd rather learn from the music. So that's all perfectly fine. You can get the PDF from my website. I'll put a link in the description down below. There is a small charge for this, just to help me recoup some of my time and let me carry on creating more of these in the future. So once you've practiced Thig and Bàta with those beats, you could also start thinking about, oh, but last week we learned some cuts, or we did sharp plaits and things. Where might I combine these? So let's have a look at adding some of those in. Something like that. So you've got the beat, the melody C, then cut down C to B. You could do a short plait to do a little grace note, a little cut up, but you're damping it off. And down to the E. Or you might want to play that G straight. And cut down the interval and leave it ringing. There's always lots and lots of choices. So if you did it one way in the first phrase, you could do it a different way in the second phrase. Quite a few cuts in there. Few cuts with some short plaits. The next movement we're going to look at today is called a little finger plait, which I just love the idea that we get to play with the pinky. This forbidden finger in the rest of the harp world really comes into its own here. It's a run of 2 grace notes up to a melody note. You kind of just need to try this one out and believe me that it works, and it's really effective, because if you see it written down, or if I just explain the fingering to you, you're going to say, no, that's a bit weird. So just come with me on this one. Place your third on the A and your second on the B. Again, the same way we're going to start with the beat. But this time your thumb is going to be on the C string. The C here is going to be the melody. The top string is your main melody note, and it's a run of 2 notes up to that melody note. In terms of ornamentation, you can use these techniques to play tune notes if you want to play it in a stopped style. It's particularly effective on wire harp, it's useful on bray as well. But in this series of workshops, we're looking at using these techniques to ornament tunes, to play decorations or grace notes. So This is two notes running up to a main note. So you're going to play the 3, play the second. Now you're going to swing your fingers out, bear with me, trust. Place your pinky on the B and your 4th finger on the A. So you're left in this somewhat strange position where your 4 is on the A, your 5 is on the B and your thumb is on the C, and you're now going to play that C. So it's 3, 2, swing your fingers out and place. Play your 3, play your 2, swing out and place. Remember you're placing 4, then the 5 on that middle string, and then you're going to play the thumb. The same thing happens as it did in the beat. The playing of the melody note and the placing to damp out happens at exactly the same time. Practice it by placing and then playing to make sure you have got your fingers in the right order. Don't try and do something like that which puts your hand into a weird position because your pinky's a bit shorter. There's also just something about this movement that it really puts a little bit of extra twist, a little bit of extra oomph onto that melody note. So 3, 2, 1, and you've left in this position. Same practice style as for every single technique we're looking at in this series. Practice it slowly, in control, steadily, gradually build the speed up. You do have to have the belief that it's worth doing this and it is worth persevering, because at the minute doesn't sound any different to that, but it will. If you can do this and get that rhythmic burble going, you just can't get the same effect just using 3 and 2. So again, you can practice it in scales. This is an ascending gesture. It's 2 grace notes running up to a melody note, so you want to do it with an upward scale. If you do it downwards, remember that melody note is going to be left and the entire scale ringing out, and we want a nice clean sound. So you can practice it really slowly. And just gradually speed it up. Same principle as with the beat or any of the other ones. Jump about octaves is a good practice. Try different intervals. Try and remember what you've done. If you can get into a little rhythm, get a bit of a pattern going, you might like it. Same as before, turn it into your own exercise. If you really like it, write a second part and turn it into your own tune. So that's the little finger plait. The beat, the little finger plait. You could combine the two of them into an exercise. So if you go back to Thig and Bàta, there's a couple of places where, yeah, I can really hear a little finger plait running in here. Remember we had the beat, cutting down, possibly a sharp plait, going down to the E. That would be a lovely place. Instead of doing a beat on the second note, do a little finger plait on the first C. Remember, you can repeat that C. There's just some ideas in there. One in at the end there this time. So experiment with that. If you remember the second tune we looked at last week, Islam cruinneagh Nambo. It's in D, by the way. Playing it with cuts. That was one of the versions we looked at before. There's a place where I can really just hear one of these little finger plaits fitting in really nicely. Classic place to put it, 3 melody notes running up. You play them as your melody notes and you repeat them. So if we do the version with the cuts and add that in, we have I think you've possibly got an extra cut in there, but there you go. So you can play around with those two tunes. We looked at Uighean, Easter eggs, that little study for adding techniques into last week. We were playing it with 2 hands. You can stay in D if you like, because we're not going to be using any of your red strings. It's a pentatonic tune, which is great for playing around with on the harp. So we had was the first part and the second part. Same ending. And we repeated each part. We were putting cuts into it. Things like that. So go back to episode 1 and remind yourself of what was happening. And we took it down to a skeleton tune, and this is where it gets useful for practicing. Finger plait in there, for example. So you're playing the G as a melody, you're going to do a run of 2 grace notes played with a little finger plait up to the B. Makes you practice this idea that you're then taking your hand off the harp and moving up to punch out another note with your thumb. You could put beats. Something along those lines. Play around with it. You could put a beat in there if you're doing the full tune. On the A. Maybe leave that one straight. Now, I know I said I was going to do two things, but I'm going to give you one more. It's something that's really useful in its own right, but it's also great to practice up this week because it will make next week's so much easier if you can play this. And this is what I call a dirham, because it sounds like that dirham, it's that snappy, short, long you use in tunes and strathspeys in particular. And it's also the precursor to learning how to do a 4-3-2 bass plait, triplet. Sometimes it's called a birrel, sometimes it's called a thistle. Again, remember, terminology is really not standardised in traditional music. So, what I want you to do to practice this is to anchor your thumb, say on the C for example, and you're going to play 3 and then 2 on the A. The way we're playing it, because remember we're looking at ornamentation, is that you're ornamenting the same note. So the first note is a grace note, da da. So the first note is a grace note, the second note is the main note. I'm doing a descending scale and handily bringing my thumb on to clean up, and it also lets my thumb anchor in a string above, which just gives you a little bit more security to do this movement. You can add the melody note before it, because the tune might be doing, there might be 2 melody notes. Your thumb anchor can be on a string higher up. It doesn't need to be just the string above. Sometimes it's easier if it's actually higher up. That's just to let you find what's comfortable for you, what sort of distance is comfortable for you, but it also depends on what's happening in the tune beforehand or where you're moving on to. But for grace notes, often it's what's gone before. But here, for example, we're coming to a higher note, we're coming to that C. There's all sorts of ways you can practice this. So if you practice up your 3-2 dirhams, it's going to make next week's triplet practice a lot easier, honest. So the second part of the Easter eggs tune would be good for practicing these 3-2 dirhams. The skeleton part. That would be a good exercise. You can take that first note with your left hand if you like. Lets you concentrate on the 3-2. You can see here I'm anchoring my thumb in that G, which gives my hand a little bit more space. I'm playing that first D with my left hand. You're coming on to do a 3-2 on a string that's already ringing, and this is something you will find you come across in real life in tunes, so it's good to practice it. And then your thumb's ready to play that higher note. If you're coming onto a string that is ringing, you just have to be bold and confident and do it. That's the worst thing you can do if you kind of, you get this buzzy, horrible stuff in, or your nails, so it's going to hit against it. You've got to be really clean and clear. So back to intention again. Your intention is to produce a really clear sound on a string that is already vibrating. You also have to remember which is the melody note. It's not, the melody is that first D and the last D. And we're putting a little grace note in between with our third finger. You could practice it all sorts of ways. So, that would be a good place to practice that. There's another favourite little Gaelic song tune that I use a lot, and it's called Uamh and Oire, the Cave of Gold. I found it in Francis Tolmie's book, 105, I think, Songs of Occupation from the Western Isles of Scotland. Francis Tolmie collected a lot of these tunes in nurseries at the manse in Bracadale, for example, on Skye. There's a couple of different versions. This is one that I'm going to use at various points throughout these 7 weeks. It's one that I'm very fond of. I've used a lot in demonstrating ornamentation and decoration on harp. Let me just play the basic tune through to you. So it's beautiful and it's quite haunting, and it's a haunting tale as well, of course, because the story is that the piper went into the cave and he met something very evil, a monster or some sort of evil thing like that. And the song is, he's saying he wishes he had 3 hands, 2 for his pipes and 1 for his broadsword. And he was never seen again, and people who were sitting in the little grassy knolls apparently have been known to hear the sound of the pipes. So I'll put a bit more information about that on the PDF for you. It's not wise to just dismiss these sort of simple tunes as being beginners' tunes. Great for teaching beginners, but you can do so much with them. You can layer up the ornamentation, you can really build it up. This is a piece that I've done a lot with, and I will put up a video at some point of a full sort of performance version, if you like, going through various different variations and ornamentations. But at the minute we're going to use it to practice some of these things that we've done here. So I'll teach you the tune. We're going from D to F, 2 Ds and an F, and then come up G, A. So that's so the second phrase starting on the G, G to F, back to the G, then come up to that C and come down the third. Third phrase, same as the first one, really standard and traditional tunes. And for the last phrase, we're going to start with 2 Gs. Down to the F, back up to the G, ending on the D. So there's lots of things we can practice with this one. We can do cuts. But you might find, oh, I'm not sure if I wanted that G to carry on ringing. I like my Ds and my As, sort of that sort of drone sound. So you might decide to use a short plait to get rid of that cut. And really throws a bit of emphasis onto the A as well. But here we're particularly looking at practicing little finger plaits and beats. So we're going to do a little finger plait. There. So So we're coming up 2. It's a slow enough tune. I probably would just play that with my second finger. Generally speaking, I do change fingers for repeated notes, but on a slow tune, it's not so important. That would be a good place to do a beat. So G. Now you have a choice. If you're still just working the beat into your head, you've got the G and the F ringing and you might like that slight clash, or you could just bring a finger, just bring your second on to touch that F out and really fling the emphasis back onto the G. So you really have to listen to the subtleties, the nuances and the intricacies of all this, but at the minute just get the movements into your fingers. So we have the first phrase now with a little finger plait. We have a beat coming in. Just learning, so we're going to do exactly the same as before. So that's our first time round. A slightly more involved version. I've added in a little 3/2 dirham. Remember, it's the third finger that's doing the grace note here. You've got a tune note, decorating the tune note that your second finger is going to play. Then I've cut down. And I'm going to cut from the C to the A. Again. So that's an example again of how your fingering is going to change if you've learned it with a nice steady. That's why I wouldn't teach a sort of fixed position. I would find that quite weak for my fourth finger to do that, and I wouldn't really get the control over the sound that I want, and it makes you a little bit less flexible. So if you know if you're at the stage, and all of these things depend on what stage of your learning you're at, and this tune can be with you for years and years and years. I probably started playing this tune over 20 years ago, and it's gone with me, and you can play it with both hands and still make a really lovely sound and a good performance. So don't ever think that, oh, I can't do that, you know, that's too advanced for me. There'll be a way that you can work on that at the minute, and you're also thinking ahead and starting to look ahead, which is really good. It's one of the advantages when I was learning. A lot of the time here in Scotland, you're teaching and you're learning in a mixed ability group, and the great thing about that would be you're doing your version, but you're also here, which might just be the tune in two hands, but you're also hearing what the more advanced players in the group are playing and the decorations that they're adding in, and it all works together. So it's a really good way of learning. So this is Uamh and Oire, and we've got some little 3/2, first phrase. We're going to cut to the first G, play the second G, and then the beat. And we've left that last note on its own. That's absolutely great to just really work in a real life, a real tune situation. And if you want to add a bit of left hand into it, you can sit on a D drone. A D and an A works really well. If you want to put something here, I would bring my thumb down to the G. Go back up to the D and the A. If you've got a big enough harp, you can maybe go down to the low D this time. Thumb down to the G. Something along those lines. There's plenty of space. You could put a little marker drone in there. Any technique that you're learning, oh, I'm learning harmonics, I'm going to try putting some harmonics in, or something along those lines. So that's little finger plaits and beats, and adding in a single grace note on the same note as a melody note using a 3/2 fingering. So keep up the cuts, up and down, thumb chokes, fork chokes, sharp plaits we've looked at a little bit today, half scratches as well. You've now got your beat and your little finger plait and your 3/2 dirham to add into the mix. So I hope you're going to work away on these. If you remember, we had a little exercise tune last week as well, so I'll just remind you of it. And we were putting cuts into it last week. We also had some short plaits. And hopefully there was space in the handout as well for you to write in your own version of it with the ornamentation from last week. And we can now add in the new things that we've learned. So we might do something like put the cut in the same place. But here you're starting. And that's be an ideal place to run up the little finger plait. And you could even cut down to the B. And you could still come up with a short plait. If you're really paying attention here, you'll notice that I am actually damping out extra notes as well. I'm getting rid of that middle B because I don't really like the sound of it along with the A and the C, and I am doing this on my gut harp as well as it being something I would do more of on a wire harp. Don't worry too much about that just now if you're struggling, just if getting these new techniques is enough at the minute. But it's just good to be aware of the next step and the next thing to be trying to clean up in your playing. So you could also put a beat. Another little finger plait would be great here. And we added a beat there. You could do a beat there. Played it slightly differently again, haven't I? Lots of options here. If you want something to focus in, just to practice, we'll do a beat in the first G, cut to the next one, cut from the E to the C, run up the little finger plait to the C, so you're running up A, B, C, cut to the B, short plait, up to the A. Little finger plait up to the C, cut down, that'll be the first thing to practice, and then we'll do a different one. This time we've put a beat on that C. Changed it around with some cuts. And we did a beat on the D. If you're ending, it might be nice to do something like that, a G up to C. So I hope this has been another useful episode for you. I can't say often enough just to encourage you just to explore these techniques on the harp. On your harp, your hands are different, your harps are different. The sounds that you will like will be different as well. So always try everything out and then see what you like and what you want to incorporate into your own playing, but just have fun with it. Thank you.